So this week, Jews are in the midst of celebrating the days of awe, the high holy days of Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, which began last Sunday evening, through Yom Kippur, the Day of Repentance, which ends this coming Wednesday evening. And during these 10 days, Jews are called to Teshuvah, or repentance, opening your book of life, looking back on the previous years to make peace, to make amends, to ask for and offer forgiveness before turning the page to enter the new year with a clean, fresh start. Teshuvah, the Hebrew word for repentance, comes from the verb shuv, which means to turn. So Teshuvah, repentance, is about turning back to reflect, turning around to change one's direction if you're going down the wrong path, returning to God or to the sacred, to oneself. I love that repentance is conceived as a motion, a movement, as an embodied act that requires turning from our own certainty toward a bigger perspective, a new perspective. And such movement, such turning, does require courage to let go of our own egos and enter into right relationship with each other and with the world, with the sacred or divine, or however we name our source of being, and with ourselves. Often it can be easier to turn away. The devastation left by Hurricane Fiona across Puerto Rico and Hurricane Ian across Cuba and Florida, the devastation of war in Ukraine and other parts of the world where we're paying less attention, bring the image of the world covered in shattered pieces really to life for me. I know from all the years volunteering down in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, the work of repair can be overwhelming, and it can take a long time. So the work of repair that lies ahead, I see, and part of me wants to sign up and go down and help immediately. But I know there will be time because it can take years to rebuild. And I can't begin to imagine what it will be like for the people of Ukraine to rebuild, or other parts of the world at war. And if we take the time to look, we can find the scattered shards everywhere. The devastation left by colonialism and conquest and generations of systemic oppression, damage to the environment that is contributing to these once-in-a-century storms that are now arriving every few years, the devastation of the pandemic, the opiate crisis, the lack of access to mental health amidst growing anxiety in our society. And I think that this growing anxiety is manifesting as anger and fear and violence. And then we have the broken pieces in our own lives that come with being human: grief and illness and failure and loss and selfishness and hopelessness and other hard things. Suffering is part of it. Suffering is part of life, part of being human, and we're not going to escape it. And some suffering is of our own making, and some suffering just happens to us. So I think it takes a lot of courage to be human, to live fully into our lives with a sense of awareness and a commitment to Teshuvah, taking time to reflect before turning a page and moving on. And courage to turn towards brokenness, to pick up a shard when we find it, to name what has been shattered and broken before we turn back toward light. Rabbi Luria reminds us also that as for beautiful and holy as this light may be, it can be overwhelming, too much, and we cannot bear it. And often, we know only the shards we find and forget that they are only part of the story. Revelation is not sealed, as we Unitarian Universalists are called to remember. None of us, no one person, no political party, no one country, no one culture, no one religion holds the whole truth or the whole story. Each shard we uncover, each ray of light we reveal is a piece. And discerning how these pieces fit together is the work of Teshuvah, of redemption, of healing. And it will never, ever be completed. As I wrote in my newsletter column this past week, I've been reflecting recently on what it means to be a religious community as we return from the pandemic. In the early weeks of the spring of 2020, when everything shut down, I think most of us thought we would return to normal after a brief interruption. And of course, it's been a little more complicated than that. Another shattering of things we believed to be the way things are. And things are not, as we return, things are not coming back the way that they were. So if I may quote myself from the newsletter. Our favorite. This is what I said. The Reverend Karen Herring notes that it is human nature to make meaning out of the chaos of our experience. Religious community can do that, giving us the tools of sacred text and poetry and prose and music, silence, ritual, prayer and meditation to give shape and language to experiences too beautiful, too terrible, too powerful, too joyful for words. Susan Wood-Mancey's chalice lighting last Sunday was a beautiful example of this. We help one another here make meaning out of the chaos of our experiences by listening, bearing witness to each other's stories, each other's passions and commitments, each other's fears and failures. And one of the gifts of having served as your minister for a long time is that I have witnessed stories over time and how you have walked with one another through joys and sorrows, some of them unbearable. But not just for a moment in time, but through the years, long enough to see what unfolds, even that which could not be imagined in the face of great loss. I keep wondering how to share that with our larger community, that this is what we do. Because it's such a beautiful and precious thing, and it should be shared. And heaven knows there are people longing for this kind of connection, this way of being listened to and accompanied. And I hear about it and I read about it all the time. We practice beloved community within First Parish, not just for ourselves, but in hope and in trust that we can offer this kind of community to our larger world, to bend that moral arc of the universe just a bit more towards justice and toward peace, toward hope and joy, toward love. We are straddling a generational shift from when almost everyone joined a religious community because that's what people did. It was a civic expectation. To the times we live in now, when people choose, and many people are choosing not to join a religious community. We have entered the age of the nuns, those who grew up without any religious community at all, and the duns, those who did grow up with religious community and are done. Now, when people join a religious community, it is not about duty and family. It's more because they are looking for spiritual connection and care for themselves, as well as the world around us. And often this means that they come in the wake of a crisis, some shattering, personal, communal, or existential, as they try to make meaning out of the chaos of their experiences. And we have alternatives for finding this connection and this care: therapy, support groups, book groups, social justice and service groups. But what we have to offer here at First Parish that is different, I believe, is spiritual care and connection, ethical discernment, and faith formation over the long haul. When we experience a shattering in our individual lives or in our world, it can feel unbearable and all-consuming. We cannot imagine that we will ever feel joy or hope again. And certainly we are shaped by brokenness, and we all bear scars. And yet, here we know we can help each other find courage to turn towards brokenness, because gathered here are those who will see each other through. See each other through the unbearable. Love and joy and hope and kindness break through, because life, whether we like it or not, continues on, and it takes us with it. Here we make time, and we make space for it all. We make time and space to turn back, to reflect, to remember when the rest of the world has moved on. Here we return to the ethical values and the spiritual practices that ground us and keep us connected to our best selves, to our source of being. And we help one another turn toward what needs to happen next to face the future. We are here when brokenness happens, when the vessels that hold joy and light and hope and expectation and the beloveds of our lives shatter, and we do not turn away. We are here for one another and the larger communities around us in the work of repair, of picking up and turning over the shards for the often painstaking work of healing, aware that further shatterings can and will happen. We are here too to witness when a shard is picked up and unexpected lightness is revealed, when the certainty of loss and death and grief meet the surprising, unexpected possibilities of life and love again. Here we remember that our lives, like the seasons, are always turning, and how we meet these turnings is a work of faith, a work of a lifetime, work of generations. As Rebecca Parker writes, even when our hearts are broken by our own failure or the failure of others cutting into our lives, even when we have done all we can and life is still broken, there is a universal love that has never broken faith with us and never will. We are the embodiment of that.